Hi, and welcome. Today we're going to continue on our journey of strategic storytelling. Remember that strategic storytelling is about using stories to serve your purpose as a business owner or in any area of your life. It's not about telling a great story, it's about telling the best story that will help you reach your goals. So, today we're going to talk about how you can use storytelling to accomplish a goal that a lot of us don't think about much, which is choosing a mentor, someone who will work with you to grow your business. And I'm going to focus primarily on business, but it could apply to other areas of life. So, the first thing I would ask is why get a mentor? Well, if you're an entrepreneur, you probably know it can feel really lonely. So you need some kind of a guide, or you need someone you can at least talk things out with, someone to be a sounding board, someone who might maybe be a little bit ahead of you in what they're doing, or maybe they just have a totally different take on what you're doing and they can give you some new ideas. Your environment that you work in keeps changing. I mean, well, just look around. As I'm speaking today, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and certainly everything in our environment is different. The way we use technology is very different. The way we relate to people, the things we think about, what's important to our clients, and certainly the stories we tell are very different in today's environment. And the market keeps changing as well. If you've been in business a while, you probably noticed that your clients respond differently to your content, to your proposals, your offers, than they did 5 or 10 years ago. In fact, I'm willing to bet that you're not offering the same content or offers that you did 5 or 10 years ago. I was going through some of my articles that were archived for 10 years or so, and I was horrified. The topics that I chose to write about are completely different than anything I would dare to write about today. Now, there are lots of opportunities to get help with your business. If you are on the internet for any amount of time, you will find people offering to coach you. If you go to a networking group, you'll hear all about coaching. And you might think, well, maybe this is something I should look into, or maybe you already have a mentor and you're thinking of getting another one. Now, you probably know that in today's world, about 99%, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe 90% of mentors are paid. They're coaches and consultants. There was a time when people would donate their services, would help someone out if they liked you, especially if you were new to the industry, especially if you're right out of college or right out of grad school. But after you've been around a while, and especially if you're in a business, it's very hard to get someone to offer to help you. For one thing, people are busy. And if someone comes to me and says, I want help with my business, I have to weigh helping them against helping my clients who I charge for exactly what this person is asking. There's an issue of fairness. So you have to assume that we're going to be talking about paying a mentor. Is it worth it? That's totally up to you. If you choose the right one, it can be amazing. If not, it can actually be quite dangerous. I want to add that you also can find your own mentor. I once worked with a client who came for help with his copywriting. He had run several restaurants and now he was doing more consulting with people who ran restaurants. But he told me that one time he wanted to open a coffee shop. And he knew a lot about full service restaurants with meals, but nothing about coffee shops. So he found a coffee shop owner in a different location where he would not be competing, and he offered to pay that coffee shop owner to teach him the business. He did not ask for anything for free. The coffee shop owner took him up on it, and he did end up with a very successful coffee shop. So you can get a mentor any number of ways. You have to just think about what is the story they're telling you when you are considering whether to work with that person in any capacity. Becoming a storyteller, chances are, if you are looking at stories, adding them to your business, you're going to become more aware of stories around you. And you're going to start listening between the lines. What is the real message of that story? Why on earth are they telling it? And you'll become more sensitive to the underlying dimensions of that story, which can make a huge difference in the way you respond. So we're going to look at 3 stories that mentors will tell you. It might be during the sales process if you're talking one-on-one. It might be something they're talking about on a webinar where they're talking about their business. It might be any number of ways. It might be even in their promotional material, their website. But listen for their stories and make an informed decision based on those stories and what you take away from them. So story number 1 is what I call the here's what I did story. What is that? Those are the people who talk about how they got started, and they use that story as their core story, as their way to attract clients. They're communicating, well, hey, I did this and it worked for me, and now I'm going to teach it to you. That's their message. So they say things like, back in the day, here's what I did to start, how I became a coach, how I became a successful copywriter, how I became a web designer, how I became a home stager, how I became a psychotherapist, how I became successful as an author, any number of things. And what they'll suggest is that you'll learn from my experience. Now, this is not a bad way to find a mentor. It's not a bad way to work with a mentor, is to use their experience. If they're doing something and you want to do the same thing, hey, that's a great place to start. But a lot of times, if they talk a lot about how they got started, their advice is going to be outdated, because things that you could do 5, 10, certainly 15 years ago, you cannot do now. Even 10 years ago, I remember talking to someone who had built a whole business based on giving live presentations at Learning Annex, which is a big learning opportunity in New York and elsewhere. Could you do that now? I don't think so. For one thing, as I was just saying, we're in a different environment. You can't go to a public place and give a talk as easily as you could back then, certainly not now. But a lot of those places started closing down even before the pandemic. They're being replaced by MOOCs, massive open online education. They're being replaced by computer software that is delivering courses. So the in-person approach can work, but it's not there like it used to be. Companies like Creative Live that are online have replaced those locations. The people you get on those courses are people you normally would not have access to in your local Learning Annex or live educational system. So on the one hand, you don't have the personal contact, but you do have access to people with a lot of good experience. And also, sometimes people will get lucky and they'll have something work for them that is totally unique. I know people who have the most amazing personality. They could talk about anything and people would sign up for whatever they had. There are people who could have a basket weaving workshop, and I can tell you, entrepreneurs all over the country would be lined up to take that workshop because they would be convinced that this person could turn basket weaving into something that would bring them success. It's a quality that they have, and sometimes you can cultivate it, sometimes not. I know someone who got started with a consulting business in one of the health coaching areas. I don't want to say the specific one, but she always talks about how she got started without a website, without a newsletter, without a lead magnet, and all of that is true. She did. But she had, at the time, a fiance, later became her husband, who was very successful online and had one of those mailing lists of communities that thought he walked on water. He could recommend back to the basket weaving and people would take it. So he promoted her. He sent out a couple of emails promoting her services, talking about how she helped people build their business with this technique she had, this mindset technique, whatever it was. And she filled her practice in a matter of weeks. Could you do that? Well, if you know someone like that guy, yeah. Did I do that? No, I didn't know anybody like that. So that's really the limit of the here's what I did story. It doesn't always work for you, and it may not work for anyone in today's environment. Story number 2 is based on something I was reading by a novelist named Mary Atkins, who teaches writing techniques, and she herself is a successful novelist, and I actually read one of her books and I liked it. But she was saying one of her core principles is she doesn't like writers' workshops or critique groups. She thinks that you should not offer your early drafts to the world to be critiqued. And she points out that when you're in a workshop and everyone goes around and you're supposed to say something, you're going to get a lot of criticism that will stifle your creativity, certainly kill your motivation, and may not be very good, because there is a difference in the quality of advice you get. So someone who is just facilitating and saying, well, let's all get together at my meeting and we'll, instead of me being the expert, you could all talk to each other. That person, as Mary Atkins said, that person is lazy. They're supposed to be helping you. They might get input from other people. That certainly is useful. But ultimately, you have to decide, are you looking for expertise or are you looking for feedback from ordinary people? And if you do, you have to make sure the people giving feedback are like those you're trying to reach in your market. The premise is that all advice is equally good, which is nonsense. I was once on a webinar way back with some people, and they had a very inexperienced person leading, and someone says, well, I want to say something. And the person said, of course, your opinion is just as valuable as anyone else's. Well, that may be true from a moral standpoint and in certain environments, but when it comes to working, no. When I was a new online marketer, I actually look back on some of the things I advised and I cringe. I did not have the experience to make those kinds of opinions valid and valuable. So think about that when you're in a group and someone says, oh, everyone's advice is equally valuable. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have free recommendations. I've been in groups where people say, has anyone had experience with this particular software? Have you used Lead Pages? If someone said, what do you know about Lead Pages? I would talk to them, even if I knew nothing about their business, or if I were not an expert in the other areas where they needed help. But I could say a lot about Lead Pages or ConvertKit or the services I used. I could talk about some things I've done, but I could not give advice unless I were positioned as an expert and I were working with someone. I was in that role of giving advice as an objective outside person. And I only do this in areas where I myself have expertise, not necessarily things I've done myself, but areas where I feel confident that I know enough to stand back and help someone. And in fact, a lot of times when someone, say, has a decision to make, whether it's business or career or life, what they're paying for is not specific advice, but they're paying for someone who can help them go through a structured process to solve their problem. Someone who can listen, someone who can ask questions based on the many, many people they've worked with. They're not trying to say, well, here's what I did, or here's something that other people are doing, or here's what I did last time. They're trying to help you arrive at the best decision for whatever area you're working on. And finally, story number 3. This is the most dangerous story. This is where you talk to someone, maybe you meet them at a networking event online, or you somehow connect with them. You're having an introductory call to see if you want to work with them. And they start saying things like, I see you as something. They might say, you should be working in this area. I once talked to someone who was trying to, for whatever reason, thought that I should be involved in marketing to financial professionals. And I did look into it. I thought it sounded like a great idea. But I found out that that market has certain challenges for copywriters. And back then I was focusing entirely on copywriting and not as much on the consulting end and the training end that I do now. But it was like, to work in those areas, the number one question they have that they're concerned about is, do you know the regulatory requirements for writing copy? That is far more important to them in many cases than creativity. I talked to someone who I knew informally, and I said, if he knew his website needed a lot of work. So I made some suggestions, and he said, well, I really like them, but I looked into it. I would have to pay something like $500 for a compliance review. And a lot of times they want someone who's been in that field. So I had to say, look, it's a great idea, but it's not practical to do that. On the other hand, I will tell you, just about every piece of advice or guidance that anyone gives you, including me, is wrong some of the time. For instance, I do know a couple people who went to conferences and someone said, here's an idea for you, and they ran with it. And I occasionally have worked with clients when I say, why don't you try X? And they usually resist, and that's fine, and they do the research, but every so often it works. They hit it up and say, I did my research and it works. So that's not 100% in that area, but if someone starts to see you as their own pygmalion, their own reflection, as something that they want to mold, that's not a good idea. And one of the worst ways this comes out is when they decide that you're probably not going to be successful at what you do. I will tell you, that is the single worst thing that can happen. Working with a mentor, especially paying someone who doesn't believe in you 110%, because that will turn out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If someone doesn't believe in you, I've been through that. When I find myself saying, I don't feel like doing this is not working, I know it's because I'm hanging out with the wrong people. Maybe mentors, maybe other people. A good mentor will help you feel energized and confident. So story about you is the single most dangerous story if they try to tell your story a new way. They can help you find your story. I do that all the time. But they could not write your story for you and certainly not impose a story on you. That story about you is really about them. It's their vision for you. You need your own vision. It has to come from within. So it can be very frustrating because I know early on I've been kind of going back and forth. Should I focus on this? Should I target that? Should I change this message? Should I offer these services to this group, or should I offer those services to that group? Those are decisions that you often cannot pass off. You have to have that inner core that motivates you to do your business in your own way. You can't really be given that. You can get guidance in that. You can talk it out with people up to a point. They can stifle your idea before it becomes real. But ultimately, the core of your business, the essence of your business, has to come from you. So what story should your mentor share? Well, it should be original. It should not be cookie cutter. There are at least a dozen mentors that I see offering the same story. I started out struggling. I almost went broke. I maxed out my credit cards. It's basically the same story over and over. Your mentor's story should be something that makes you say, that's a new take on things. I hadn't thought of that. Maybe you get an aha moment when you hear their story. Not cookie cutter advice, but a real, genuine original. And you look for signs that they're bringing something unique to the table. For instance, when I work with clients on storytelling, in case you haven't noticed, I have my totally different take on storytelling. I don't know anyone else who offers storytelling the way I do to serve your business. In fact, in reviewing the book I have, one of the people who wrote the prologue, Ian Brody, said, I didn't think there was anything original to be said about storytelling, but this is original. This has 3 different kinds of stories that you don't usually think of. I talk about storytelling as a way to serve your business and choosing your story to fit your strategy, not working on your story based on the arc of the story or because it's a good movie. I hate Cinderella. The story itself is a great story, but not for business. And that's something that you won't find everywhere else, probably not anywhere else. When I started working in that area, that's when I said, okay, I can do this. This is the way I feel confident. When I worked with careers, I had my own approach to career change. It was not a copy of the standard manuals you would see, what I call the party line on careers. I felt more comfortable doing that, and I look for that in other people. I want to see that they've thought things through, and they're not just repeating what their own mentors told them. They've been through this themselves. And by the way, that's why when someone says, I have coaches working for me, I've trained them, that usually doesn't work because they're repeating or regurgitating what someone else said. And it's not truly theirs, so they don't know what to do when you throw them a curve. What you're looking for is something like, most people do X, but I do Y instead, and the reason I do it is. And what a really great mentor does is help you tell your story in a new way that makes you feel like you own that story, and it's going to help you reach your goals more quickly and easily. I have an ebook. I'm going to put the link in the comments. kathygoodwin.com/mentor book that is your guide to choosing a mentor. It's very inexpensive on purpose because I think it's something that people should be aware of and want to read, and I encourage you to get it. But either way, I encourage you to think about the things we've talked about today and make an informed decision. And not just for mentors, but when you're thinking about any service, listen to the story of the person who is trying to motivate you to work with them, to sign up for their service, and ask yourself, what is the story really saying about that person and how they're going to work with me? And that's the essence of strategic storytelling, using stories to support your strategy and help you reach your goals and your purpose smoothly, effectively, and happily.